My name is David Gottfried. I am the Deputy Director of the National Nanotechnology Coordinated Infrastructures Coordinating Office at Georgia Tech. I want to welcome you to this month's NNCI monthly webinar, this month focused on innovation and entrepreneurship. And before I turn it over to my colleague, Carl Boringer, to introduce today's speaker, I'll just let you know about our next monthly webinar, which will be held November 10th, also at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And that will be a webinar in the computation series featuring Dr. Sheila Aboud from Synopsys. If you have missed any of our previous webinars, you can find recordings of them on our YouTube channel, and you can find that by just Google searching NNCI in YouTube, and that'll be the #1 item that pops up. Just a reminder, everybody, all the attendees, of course, are muted and no video. If you have questions for our speaker, just put that into the Q&A box on your BlueJeans screen. So with that, I will turn it over to Professor Carl Boringer from the University of Washington, one of our NNCI site directors. Carl, it's all yours.
Thank you, David, and welcome to this NNCI seminar that focuses on entrepreneurship and innovation. My name is Carl Boringer. I'm a professor at the University of Washington, and I'm the site director for the NNCI Northwest Nanotechnology Infrastructure Network. This is a partnership between the University of Washington and Oregon State University. So today I want to introduce a special speaker who really doesn't need an introduction, but I'll do it anyway, and I'll keep it short. So I'm very happy to have Kurt Peterson here as a speaker today. Just a few words about his background. Kurt received his bachelor's degree cum laude in electrical engineering from UC Berkeley and a PhD in electrical engineering from MIT. He established a micromachining research group at IBM between 1975 and 82, so in the very early days of MEMS, when he also published a foundational paper that is still the most frequently referenced work in the field of MEMS, silicon as a mechanical material. Since then, Kurt Peterson has founded or co-founded 6 companies, all in MEMS technology. And about 10 years ago, he has joined the Silicon Valley Band of Angels, where he now co-chairs the Hardtech Group. The Band of Angels is an angel investment group that mentors and invests in early stage startup companies. Kurt has published more than 100 papers and more than 35 patents go on his record in the field of MEMS. He has received several prestigious awards, including the IEEE Medal of Honor in 2019 and the IEEE Simon Rattle Medal in 2001 for his contributions to MEMS. He's a member of the National Academy of Engineering, and he is a Life Fellow of the IEEE for his contributions in the commercialization of MEMS technology. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Kurt. Welcome very much, and thanks very much for giving our seminar today.
Carl, thank you very, very much for the kind introduction. First, I want to thank David Gottfried and Carl Boringer for inviting me to give a presentation today. I spend most of my time with startup companies nowadays, and I see a lot of startup companies from universities, and they're, especially the very earliest stages ones, are kind of just learning, what it's all about. And so I'm hoping today to sort of give a primer on what investors are looking for in early stage startup companies. So this is not for experienced entrepreneurs, but it's kind of a basics of what investors are looking for. So as Carl mentioned, I'm a member of the Silicon Valley Band of Angels. I've been there for about 10 years, and I'm also a member of the Life Science Angels, so I'm very active with both of those local groups. So last 5 or 10 years, there's literally been an avalanche of startup companies. The Band of Angels alone sees more than 50 new startup companies every month. And we are only one of more than a dozen major angel groups in the San Francisco Bay Area. Of course, most regions of the U.S. have their own angel groups. For the Band of Angels, we have 4 startup companies give presentations at each monthly dinner. 2 to 3 of these get investments, usually from the Band of Angels. So we do 20. Actually, this year is going to be a bigger year. We're probably going to do more than 30 investments in 2021. Since 1994, the band has invested in over 400 companies. Since 1994, the band's portfolio has had 16 IPOs, including one of those, which was my company Zephyrus in 2000. We got an investment from the Band of Angels in 1997, and it's kind of fun being on the other side of the table right now. Also, since 1994, the band's portfolio has had 82 acquisitions, so close to a quarter of the companies that we've invested in historically have had successful exits. We've also invested more than $400 million during that time period, and the band has typically about 165 active angel investors at any particular time. They're kind of coming and going. My own background is I began work at IBM Research, I think as Carl mentioned, in 1975 and started working on MEMS technology. In 1982, I made the big step of leaving IBM to join a small startup company, Transsensory Devices, to make pressure sensors and do R&D projects for people. I was very naive at that time in terms of startup companies, and actually TDI was pretty much a total disaster, so a total failure. But I started another company a few years later with a couple of partners called Novasensor, and we were actually acquired by GE about 5 years after founding the company. And the company is still active today and still builds a lot of pressure sensors and accelerometers. I founded Zephyrus in 1996 to do molecular diagnostics using microfluidics. They have a yearly run rate. Well, they were acquired in 2016. Right now, they probably do more like $1 billion of yearly annual revenue. So it's Zephyrus was a very big success story. They were one of the first ones to come out with a COVID test. And they had a lot of sales in that COVID test since March of 2020. SciTime, I was one of the founders of SciTime in 2004. They have now sold more than 2 billion MEMS-based oscillators. They did an IPO in 2019, and they have a current market cap of I think it's closer to 4.5 billion right now. Profusa, I was one of the founders in 2008. They make an implantable glucose sensor. They've really been successful in raising money from DARPA and NIH, and the company has raised more than 22 million, but they're still private. I founded Varion, was one of the founders of Varion in 2009, building MEMS sensors on glass. The company was acquired by Qualcomm a year or two later. And as Carl mentioned, I've been now with the Band of Angels since 2011, and I've invested in the past 20 years or so, I've invested in more than 100 startup companies. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is based on these 100 startup companies I've been involved with. So what are some of the key factors for attracting investors? The team, intellectual property, your product, of course. You have to know your market, competition, partnerships, supply chain, prototypes, exit strategy, and understand who are you pitching to. So I'm going to talk about each one of these issues, which impacts attracting investors. And then after we talk about each one of these, I'm going to give examples of a dozen or so companies that I've invested in over the last few years. About half of them are failures and half of them are successes, which is kind of like sort of my average success rate. And I think you'll get some insight into why some of these startup companies fail and why they're successful. So the team is the most important factor for investors. We're always looking for, great, exciting, excitable teams. Ideally, investors would, obviously a lot of companies come from academia, but investors really like to see team members who have been there, done that. And if statistically, as you can imagine, founders of previously successful companies have a much higher chance of success in the next venture. So, investors are looking for successful exits. So having team members that have experience is one of the really valuable aspects you can have. Ideally, the team should have business experience as well as technical experience. So lots of times, I think early stage companies, they're obviously focusing on their technology, but if you can have some business experience on the team, that's really a big plus. The team should be coachable. This is actually a word which we use a lot when we talk about startup companies. Having this sort of somebody who, thinks they know everything is kind of not the ideal kind of situation. So the team should be coachable. The team should include really highly credible advisors, experts in their technical field, and the VCs and angels will want to talk to these advisors. They'll call them up before they invest and get their opinions, and it's really important to have a good group of advisors on the team. And investors love to see a passionate team. They like to see that you're enthusiastic about your technology, that you're determined to bring that to your customers, and investors really like to see that. Intellectual property, it's really a requirement that you have a unique, protectable IP in place or underway. One of the top things we look for in companies. Angels and VCs will actually want to review patents and even have them analyzed sometimes by patent attorneys. So again, it's really considered important. And investors really hate it when founders say, oh, we're so smart and experienced, it will take a competitor 5 years to catch up. That's not really a good thing to sort of say, because you are not the only smart people out there. So again, people look for good team members who have a realistic view of kind of what's out there. Spend your money for good patent attorneys. It's your product and your company, and you need to show investors that you think your company is worth it. So lots of times, people want to write the patents themselves, and sometimes that's okay, but by and large, that's kind of not really a good idea. You really need to get good patent attorneys, because at the end of the day, most companies are acquired, and a big thing acquiring companies are looking for is IP, is good IP. So it's really good to have a good patent attorneys. If your technology comes from the university, have an exclusive option to the patents. Most universities today have really good licensing programs in place, and this really usually isn't a problem. Your product. It's really important that you be able to clearly articulate how your product provides distinguishing and compelling benefits to the customer. And yes, people talk about these 30-second pitches or 1-minute pitches. It really is important to have a really concise, accurate 30-second pitch. For every company I've done, I've had that pitch, and because you really don't have time oftentimes to attract the attention of a potential investor. But if you have a good pitch, you can attract their attention quickly. Ideally, your product is not a one-off thing, but it can be configured, later down the road into a menu of different follow-on products. So people are looking for companies that sort of have sustainability. So if you just have one product or one idea or one app, that's usually not sort of the way to go. It's really a good idea to have a menu, a possible menu of different follow-on products. People, investors will look how mature is your product or your technology. Investors tend to avoid what they call science projects. This is another term which we use a lot when we're evaluating companies. So if it's kind of just a a super early demo or just an idea, we tend to avoid those kind of companies. You will need a prototype, and I'll talk more about this later. How complicated is your product to manufacture? Investors will ask for your cost of goods, and they will expect to see your supply chain. More about that later. But they're really concerned about how complicated your product is to manufacture, how much it will cost, to ramp up to production with your product. And will your product require approvals, like FDA approvals? If so, if you do require FDA approvals, you really need to have a regulatory person on the team, even if they're sort of just a consultant to start off with. Know your market. Nothing is more convincing than an entrepreneur who fully understands her market. I guarantee that the angels and the VCs that you are meeting with will know that market. I'm constantly surprised in meetings I have with new companies with our Band of Angels group. There'll be 10 or 15 Band of Angels people in the meeting. And I've never been to a meeting where one of those angel members, didn't understand the market very well. So know the customers for your market. Who is the decision maker for purchasing your product? Put yourself in the shoes of your customers. So, investors will look for this, whether you're doing this or not. And, the other thing, your product will not really likely come into full production onto the market for 3 to 5 years once you start the company. So you have to look at what are today's market trends. And I'm going to talk more about that in terms of the companies that I bring up. And how does your market fit into those trends? What are the driving forces in your market? Competition. Understand your competition backwards and forwards. It's really important. But be very careful not to disparage or underestimate them. A lot of times, some entrepreneurs will say, oh, this company doesn't know what they're doing, blah, 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 blah. That's kind of not taken in a very good way, because they've started their company and they're doing something successful, so you need to appreciate that. It's really important to have a matrix of competitive companies and how you compare with them. This should be a matrix format with companies in the columns and important features in the rows, like speed or size or performance or whatever. We really like to see companies who really understand their competition. So why is your technology better than the competition? Cost usually is not really a very compelling advantage for investors to look at, because they kind of look at, well, the competition can easily go down in cost. So you have to have other, typically performance and benefits advantages than the competition. Go to trade shows and talk to your competitors. I see this a lot with good startup companies. You learn a tremendous amount of information, and investors will be impressed that you went to a trade show and talked to competitors and you know them personally. That's really important. Hire key people from your competitors. This is one of the most convincing things for investors. If you see a competitor, a startup company, and they've hired a salesperson from a competitive company, that's really a very, very good sign. People really appreciate that. One of the most important things for me is, and other angel investors, is partnerships. We typically are not intimately familiar with your market and your technical field. So we look for people who work in your company's field to vouch for and to validate your product and your approach. So that's kind of what partnerships are all about, vouching for and validating your product and your approach. As a startup, the most valuable asset you can have is a relationship with an established company, or even 2 to 3 companies, which support your work. Ideally, it would be monetary support or a joint project, but sincere interest is okay. We're really looking for this validation of outside sources. Oftentimes, also, your partners are potential acquirers, and I'll talk more about that later also. Even government dollars, NIH and NSF and DARPA and even NASA, provide a very high level of validation for investors. You have to, though, do recognize that government can be a distraction. In fact, it used to be, I had several entrepreneur friends who called government money cocaine because you could get hooked on it. And that used to be more the case. Today, the government agencies really realize that you want to build a real company, and they try not to distract you from your product plans, but you need to recognize this. And I'm also going to talk a little bit later on in terms of partnerships. NSF has a hugely valuable marketing program for startups called iCore, which I've had even experienced entrepreneurs, serial entrepreneurs, go through the iCore program, and they're very impressed with that. So, look into that program if you get a chance. Design for manufacturing and supply chain. An investor can often tell when she has a winner if the company has a well thought out development partner and a well-planned established supply chain. My pet peeve is that the operations side of a startup is often neglected by academic founders. I think that's becoming less the case over the years, but it still is the case. I had a professor friend of mine that once told me the inventors are the most important part of the company. And I said, wrong. The operations people are the most important folks. Design for manufacturing, process control, quality, on-time delivery, yield. Investors will be looking, if you're trying to attract some of these people, the design for manufacturing folks, the supply chain folks. At Cepheid, we hired 2 junior engineers, as well as, of course, a number of PhDs. And it turns out that those junior engineers had previous experience launching products designed for manufacturing. They had been there, done that. And today, they're the most important part of the company at Cepheid. Those 2 junior, of course, they're not junior anymore. I wish I had a nickel for every biotech instrument I have seen, which looked like spaghetti on the inside and never went to market. So this design for manufacturing and getting these experienced operations people in place is really important. I'm sorry about this last comment, but I just couldn't resist it. Prototypes. So today, investors really expect to see prototypes before they invest. And part of the thing is this expectation is really a test of the commitment of the team. That's part of the reason for this expectation. Oftentimes, founders will say, oh, we need cash to build a prototype. But the most investable startups are incredibly resourceful, and sometimes I'm amazed that they actually find a way. So find a way to build that prototype because it's really a test of the commitment of the team. They can be relatively crude, but of course, the better they are, the better the reception will be. And of course, there are so many resources out there to build all kinds of prototypes, university labs and fabs, accelerators, development houses. There's lots of places and resources you can tap to build these prototypes. Be resourceful. Investors will love it. Exit strategy. Please don't say either an acquisition or an IPO. These are the only 2 options for successful companies. So this response kind of implies that you don't understand or haven't thought about the exit. Recognize that much less than 1% startups actually do an IPO. A good acquisition is completely acceptable to most investors. Although I do have to say VCs do tend to look a little bit more for unicorns, but angel investors and investor groups and a lot of VCs, acquisition is perfectly acceptable. Have a well thought out list of potential acquirers on a slide. Maybe the partners we talked about earlier. Ideally, you have even spoken with some of them. And also strategize the best timing to look for an acquisition. Typically just before needing to ramp up a sales team, which is going to require a lot of money. That's sort of a good time to look for an acquisition. And I'm going to give some examples on companies who did exactly that and got a very good acquisition. But I always tell people that to run your company as if it could do an IPO, because the systems that you put in place, the professionally organized systems, and the way you operate the company, if you operate it as if you're could do an IPO, it will look much more attractive to a potential acquirer. So that's a huge advantage for that acquirer. And the last point I have is understand who you're pitching to. VCs and individual angels and angel groups all have different agendas and different ways of behaving. VCs typically want a board seat and they're looking for a larger return. Individual angels can be more swayed by social or personal interests. Angel groups can be more complicated by group dynamics. Example, if one person in a group is negative, it can potentially sour the whole group. So you need to be aware of these. And of course, our angel groups are also aware of these, and we try to take that into account, but still that can happen. Get to know the portfolio of who you're pitching to. You'll better understand what they're looking for, and you might be able to compare yourself to one of their portfolio investments. So get to know who you're actually pitching to and who they invest in. And also remember that getting an investor is like getting married. Really, the investor and the company are going to be partners for many years. I just was at a board meeting last night, and for a company that I've been on the board for about 4 years. And so now all these investors, they're still there and they're still looking for their return. And it's been many years now. So it really is like getting married. It's a commitment. And it's such a big commitment. It really takes more than just a single or even 2 to 3 dates, to get that person really committed, because it is such a commitment. So you realize that you're really getting in bed with somebody for many years to come when you get an investor on board. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about, for the next few minutes, some successes and failures in companies that I've had. Some of the successes have been these companies in green here, Intelligent, CommonDiagnostics. I won't read them all. But there's been about an equal number, or I typically more average about 40% of my companies are successes, of my investments are successes. So this kind of matches that a little bit. So the first one, Light Blue Optics, Captivo. So it's in red, so it was a failure. The relationship began in 2008. They had an exciting Pico projector project out of Cambridge in the UK. A really smart, passionate team, great IP. I didn't invest at that time. And actually turned out that the Pico projector they were trying to build failed, and all the investors bailed. But I still really liked the team, and the founding team resurrected the company. A good friend of mine was on the new board of directors. And what Captivo does is they capture images from whiteboards. So they have this little imaging, I call it a gooseneck, that sticks out over the whiteboard, captures the images, but it subtracts out the hands and the people. So the images just appear. They had a great supply chain, a great product, designed for manufacturing and all of that. They had sales. I invested in 2017. But management couldn't handle the sales and marketing aspects of the company, and the company was sold for a total loss. But the product is still for sale. So, it's kind of a good investment in terms of investing in the technology, but not a good investment in terms of an investment. Intelligent, more a positive story. Intelligent developed the first ever mobile ASIC chip for receiving broadcast television. This was in 2004. So the founder and CEO was a good friend of mine. I invested. For 3 years, they were actually the fastest ever growing chip company, because all of Asia, China, Japan, and Korea were just devouring these chips. They just couldn't make them fast enough. The company was planning for a more than $1 billion IPO in 2011. But in 2010, a very strong competitor finally came to the market, and revenue and market share evaporated. And this was an article in EE Times at the time. cause of intelligence spectacular fall. China done it. So China, some competitor out of China had a chip that competed with Teligent and kind of cleaned up. Teligent was eventually acquired, I think, a year later for much, much less than $1 billion. But even then, I made a 7% per year return, so I can't complain. Ondavia, another close to failure. Ondavia uses surface-enhanced Raman spectroscopy to detect and measure concentrations of contaminants in water in the parts per billion range in a handheld instrument in minutes. Their current market is the fracking market. It's their largest customer base. One of their key employees at the time was a marketing guy from the water testing industry. I sort of call him a competitor who joined, Ondavia. And they had grants from NSF. So I invested in 2011. There's part of the website of the company. Fast, easy, do-it-yourself chemical analysis. But the fracking industry was so slow. Oh my God. 10 years later, after investing in the company, it's really turned into a lifestyle company with 5 employees and about $1 million a year selling product. So I'm likely to take a tax write-off next year. Chirp. Chirp is a MEMS-based company building an ultrasonic ranging chip. Entirely new type of MEMS device. And of course, I'm a MEMS person, so I get attracted to these kind of companies. The founders were friends of mine from UC Berkeley, David Horsley and others. They were part of the UC Berkeley incubator, Skydeck, so that was really a positive thing. They had an excellent IP, supply chain, and team. And they were getting traction from the VR, AR industry. Intel and other prominent VCs were interested in investing and were talking with them. So I invested in 2015. In only 3 years, they were acquired by TDK and Vensense. So Chirp slurped up by TDK, another EE Times article. So I had a 54% per year return. So the key things here, again, the team, IP, and operations, we talked about those before. Silver Bullet, another failure, it's in red here. They make an implantable orthopedic screws that's coated with a patented silver layer, which prevents infections. Have a huge IP portfolio. The screw creates a cloud of bacteria-killing silver ions in the tissue, which basically, during the operation of installing the screw, helps prevent infections. They were founded in 2009. One of my partners at Cepheid was on the board of directors. I invested in 2015 or 14. The company was so incredibly slow. After 7 years, my friend finally resigned from the board of directors. And even today, there is still no FDA approvals or even applications or sales of any kind. I think the company was just way too lean. They only raised about $5 million since 2009. I think they have about 5 employees today. So I think they were just too slow, not passionate enough, maybe. I don't think the company is likely to survive, but it might. Zephyrus. Zephyrus was developing a single cell Western blot assay. And I won't talk about Western blots, but everything in biotech is moving towards single cell analysis. Everything. A good professor friend of mine from UC Berkeley founded the company and asked me to help. I invested in 2014. The company was very lean, which is as long as they're not too lean, this is one of the attractive things for investors because it limits your dilution. They developed the instrument and the disposable supply chain in record time, and they were acquired after only 2.5 years by Biotechne. And was the announcement for that. I had a 49% return rate. And again, the very positive things there was they were addressing a key market trend, everything going towards single cell analysis. Also, for design for manufacturing and operations, they had that under control also with the instrument and the disposable. So a very, very good result from Zephyrus. Kanapur. Kanapur has an exciting technology for curing diabetic wounds. And even today, I kind of wish I could get this to turn around. They treated actually 160 patients. All of them were cured. 20 of those patients had amputations that were scheduled. Those amputations were canceled. Incredible results. They have a technology which uses injected antibiotics activated by ultrasound. My father was a diabetic, and he had went through a period where he had wounds on the heels of his feet, and he was like a year he couldn't walk, and twice a week somebody would come in and dress those wounds. So this diabetic wounds is a huge problem. The company was founded and run by a medical doctor and his wife. I agreed to invest if they hired a proper CEO. They eventually hired one of the CEOs, which we suggested. But I asked the CEO, I said, there's a really strong dynamic with this husband and wife team. Can you handle this strong dynamic? And he said, oh, yes, I've been there, done that. No problem. So I invested in 2015. CEO quit after 3 months. Basically, he couldn't handle the strong dynamics. The company limped along for 5 more years. They tried another CEO. He quit after a year. So I took a tax write-off. But it's an uncoachable team. And again, this is really one of the things we look for is this coachable team, which I mentioned earlier. And sometimes things just don't work out, even if it's just a wonderful idea. And I think ultimately one day this will probably turn into a great product by somebody. Next input. They have a force sensor, which looks a lot like piezoresistive pressure sensor. I know these devices. I designed and commercialized them at Novasensor. So I was excited about this company. I connected with the founders when they were at Georgia Tech. They hired a super experienced CEO out of InvenSense. And in 2014, I actually co-sponsored the next input at the Band of Angels, and we got a very good investment there. They developed an incredibly professional supply chain. They penetrated many industries, which is very important because it's kind of like being diversified. The same product going into automotive, mobile devices, and appliances, which have totally different dynamics in each one of these markets. So it makes a diversified portfolio. They were acquired by Qorvo in April of this year, and we made a 36% per year return. And the key things there is the experienced team, this really experienced CEO, and also operations. Again, a very professional supply chain. Chef's Feed. So I normally don't invest in software internet companies just because I don't understand the space. I'm really a hardware guy. I'm a hardcore hardware guy. For some reason, though, Chef's Feed convinced me to invest in 2014. They had a website catering to the restaurant scene, articles and videos by local chefs, discounts at restaurants, events. They had partners like Visa, Coca-Cola, Whole Foods, Del Monte, Uber, all of these, Facebook, Samsung. They had a very big presence in San Francisco. And actually, they had $4.5 million in revenue in 2019, really a very respectable revenue. Then COVID hit. They had an asset sale late in 2020, and I guess the moral is you invest in what you know. And again, sometimes things just don't work out. Embolex, I think I got 2 or 3 more here. Embolex makes a new catheter for treating liver tumors. The catheter assures that all of the chemicals are injected into the tumor. And the efficacy has proven far superior to traditional catheters, which don't get all of the chemicals into the tumor. It was founded by an experienced friend of mine, excellent IP and product development partner. And in 2014, I co-sponsored Embolex at the Band of Angels. And just at that time, they were just applying to the FDA for approval of their product called a Sniper. And there's a picture of it on their website. The team has been very lean. Again, a very positive thing. Sales are now beginning to take off, about $1 million per quarter. And they haven't got acquired yet, but I expect an excellent acquisition for Embolex in 2022. And again, the key things there, the team, IP and operations, just again, a really well put together company. IQ Solar. Well, this was a really exciting company. And I'm going a little bit over, but I only have one more, I think. So it's really an exciting solar cell inverter technology using brand new silicon carbide transistors. I asked a friend of mine at Stanford to look at the circuit. He said it was excellent. So it was a seemingly excellent technical team, even though the CEO was not all that familiar with the particular market they were in. There's the inverter. I invested in 2013. They failed to get regulatory approval in California, the largest market. They had reliability problems. The CEO wouldn't take advice from anyone. The company was sold for a total loss. But the products are still for sale. You can go online to the company that acquired the assets, and the products are for sale, and they've managed that transition very, very well right now. So again, uncoachable team. I think one of the most common failures in startups that don't make it. Okay, I'm going to skip this one actually. And I'll skip this one too. And start here. CommonDiagnostics. I look on CommonDiagnostics as the perfect storm. There's a technology called digital PCR, which is becoming increasingly important for cancer diagnostics. Digital PCR accurately quantifies how much target DNA is in a sample. There's a company called Bio-Rad, which owns the only digital PCR technology available. CommonDiagnostics proposed an alternative digital PCR process using microfluidic circuits. They had excellent IP, excellent supply chain, excellent strategic partner. There's their instrument. The CEO has been there, done that with a previous startup. He partnered with a Stanford cancer expert. I invested in 3 rounds of financing, and in 3 years, their first product is launched. The company is immediately acquired by the Bio-Rad competitor, Thermo Fisher. So now Bio-Rad is not the only game in town for digital PCR. And so this was all planned out again from the beginning. There was a 74% per year return on investment for CommonDiagnostics. Again, I think this is really the kind of company we really look for. They're right involved with the market trend, where the market is going. Strong IP operations and a partner, experienced team, just really, again, the perfect storm. So let me end by a slide with some other hints. Incubators and accelerators are incredibly effective, and they really, really work. Investors really like companies which are being coached by accelerators. If you're starting a company, I would really get to know the ones in your area. And again, I mentioned this before, but the NSF I-Corps program is excellent and very well respected. Mentors, there are really many, many experienced entrepreneurs that enjoy mentoring new startups. Get to know the ones in your area, ask them to review the deck, get involved with them. They can really give you a lot of good advice and hints and increase your network. And of course, that's actually this point, network. The more people you know, the more people you talk to, the more likely you're going to get funded and be successful. And also remember that in this networking process, you're going to end up kissing a lot of frogs before you meet your next Prince Charming. So just be aware that that's going to happen. And realize that a startup is a journey. It's not a single task. It's going to take years to be successul. We kind of look for, it's oftentimes 7 or 8 years before, especially hardware companies become successful. So be prepared for that. It's a journey. Be resourceful, be persistent, be passionate. Investors really like to see very enthusiastic founders. It's your opportunity to change the world. So really, that's one of the things that keeps me looking at startup companies, because The founders are always so enthusiastic and energetic, and they all want to change the world, and that's just really an exciting thing to be involved with. So it's a fun area. It's a fun career. And so I encourage all of you who have good ideas that you can possibly take to the market and you're passionate about doing that, go ahead and start a company. And I'd be happy to talk to you about that. So thank you all very much for listening. I appreciate it. And take any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Kurt. Carl, go ahead. So, Carl, if you want to handle the questions, or I can, whichever you prefer.
Sure, I can get started here. And I also want to thank Kurt. And we have already a few questions in the Q&A box here. I encourage everybody to type your questions there, and I can pass them along. The first one actually came from Mark Allen from the University of Pennsylvania. And there's actually a comment and a question, and I confirm and second the comment from Mark. Kurt, thank you very much for having been and continuing to be a great inspiration for all of us in the field of MEMS. It's been really wonderful to have you here and continue your support. So Mark also asked, you mentioned that VCs want to talk to a company's scientific advisors to get a technical opinion, but these advisors are often already on the company's side. Could you discuss this kind of conflict?
Yeah, that is a conflict, but we recognize that that's a conflict, and take that into account when we're talking with them. And in many cases, we'll go and talk to other people ourselves. Especially here locally, the Band of Angels and the Life Science Angels have a lot of contacts at Stanford and Berkeley, and we will talk with people who are also in those fields. And as I mentioned, when the angel groups get together and meet, and this is one of the advantages of groups, and why I will do some individual investments once in a while on my own without the Band of Angels involved, but I really like getting the group involved because you have so many different viewpoints that you can listen to. And so that's what angel groups are looking for, as many different viewpoints as they can. They will talk to the company's strategic advisor group or their advisory group, technical advisory group, but they will talk to others also. So, and then you need to be aware of that also.
Great, thank you. I'll go to the next question, which I'm actually also very curious about. This comes from Junbyeom Kyo. And again, he thanks for your great talk. And he notices that it took, the time that it took for the companies that you founded to go to an exit was faster than he expected, and also faster than I would have expected for hard tech companies. Could you comment on that? Is there a strategy?
Yeah.
Or yeah.
I'm choosing companies which have exited right in the last 10 years. So there are many companies that I invested in that haven't exited. So these are the ones that exited. So there may be a little bit bias to the quote unquote data here because I was obviously looking for some kind of exit. But I still have many companies on my list that have been 10 years and not exited yet, but still look positive. So maybe not 10 years, but like 7 years or so. Sorry, I hit a button here.
Do you have a median or an average number?
I kind of so actually like my companies. So like SciTime, it was like before they did they exited, I think it was more than 10 years before they were sold to Megachips. And then it was another few years after that before they did the IPO. So I think for hardware companies, I would say it's really more averaging more like 7 years. And again, the data may be just biased because I was looking for companies that had exited. Sorry about that.
Thanks. I see another question from Rima Bjorkland, and she reads that women make about 50% of the entrepreneurs, but receive 2% of the VC funding. Is that reasonably accurate, or what can female entrepreneurs do differently?
I'm sorry, would you say that again, the numbers again, Carl?
Here the numbers that she is writing is that it makes up 50% of the entrepreneurs, but only 2% of the VC funding. Is that accurate?
50% of the entrepreneurs get 2%. Yeah, I mean that could be accurate. I mean, VCs are looking for, as I mentioned, and as you know, VCs are really more often looking for the unicorn. So a lot of the big areas like AI and autonomous vehicles. I mean, these are getting huge, billion-dollar investments, and we kind of play more in the realm of companies that are more likely to get acquired, and they're kind of smaller but can still have very good returns. Typically, those like an AI company would not come to an angel investor to get investments. They would just bypass that whole round and go directly to the venture capitalists. So it's maybe it's just the area that we interact with.
I think the question was also about bias men or a disadvantage for women in the VC field.
Yeah. That's one of the areas I've tried to be proactive with. Actually, of the exits that I was showing today, 3 of those exits were, I think there were 6 exits that I was talking about, and 3 of them were women CEOs. So it is a problem, but I've been doing startups, for so many years now, for 40 years or something. I do see big improvements over the last 5 or 10 years in terms of women entrepreneurs, and I think people are. There are more women entrepreneurs. There are more investments for women. But it's still certainly a problem that needs to be worked on.
Are there specific things that women can do, or what are the bottlenecks that are
there's a group called Women in Engineering that the IEEE sponsors that also has an entrepreneurial part of that. That I've been involved in several sessions over the years, the Women in Engineering entrepreneurial aspects, and I would really get involved with that group. I can make some contacts there if they would like me to.
Great, thanks. I see another question from Mark. He comments, often but not always, a passionate team and a coachable team are orthogonal. How do you, as an investor, thread this needle?
Yeah, that's a good point, Mark. Clearly, we do look for, I'll say, over-passionate kind of things is maybe the sense. We do kind of gauge ourselves to that. If you can sort of tell if people are being reasonable or reasonable expectations, or what it comes down to is realistic expectations. That's what people are looking for. We've seen so many companies, we've seen so many successes and failures. We kind of have, I'll say, maybe a little bit more reasonable expectations. So we kind of bias our judgments on that. And we advise companies on that. Oh, you're not going to do an IPO. You're not going to have sales of $100 million next year. And so we do try to coach and mentor those companies to try to be more realistic. And everybody is always looking for the hockey stick. And the hockey stick is usually not there, or it's usually stretched out way beyond what you hope there is. But even VCs, they kind of balance that. They sort of expect you to be a little bit over enthusiastic and over promising a little bit, but still have that sense of being realistic. So it is kind of a fine line that we look for. You really need to push yourself to be a little bit over energetic, but at the same time not being too unrealistic. So that's kind of the balance that we're looking for. It is a balance. If you sort of, we also see companies that, periodically they underestimate what the sales are going to be, or they really lowball what potential sales are going to be. And we encourage those companies to increase their push yourself a little bit harder. So there's sort of a balance that you look for.
Thanks.
I'm sorry I can't explain it any better than that.
I see another question from Edward Chan. He is asking, he's working in advanced materials, and he was just wondering whether this is also something that's interesting for the band. And I think you're much broader than MEMS overall, but advanced materials.
We're looking for any deals. I don't know if we have done some materials deals, but again, the devil is in the details, right? What exactly is the materials? How fast can you get to market? Are the markets that you're looking for, will they accept new materials quickly, or are they very conservative about new materials? So it's all the balance of the business plan. It's not just the technical aspects. It's the go-to-market strategy. How are you going to go to market? What are the expectations that you can really meet reasonable sales? So yes, we are interested in materials deals, and there was one. I won't get into exactly what that was because I don't remember the details of it. But we have invested in materials deals, and again, it depends on all the other aspects of the business plan that we build the judgments on, or whether to invest or not.
So we're coming up at 2:00 West Coast time. Maybe I'll do one more question by myself. I didn't type that in, but earlier you mentioned that ideally a startup company should have an array of products or a family. And I'm wondering, maybe also out of self-interest, in how broad should that be? So, for example, there could be an extreme case where you have a consumer product, but also a defense product. Is that too broad for a startup company?
I've been involved with a few companies that had that sort of same thing, Carl, and they had troubles taking off, because, oftentimes people try to spin that off into two different companies, the defense company and a consumer company, but then it's really difficult for a small company to sort of handle both of those aspects. So the advice I usually give is, focus on, it depends on the product and all of that, but get the military involved, get them sort of on board, get money from them, and then try to use that money to advance the commercial product. So it's a really difficult thing to balance, and it's case to case dependent. So, I'm not sure what else to say beyond that, case to case dependent, but it's difficult to handle both of those markets simultaneously. And the few examples that I have of companies that tried to do that were not successful.
Yeah. I just want to thank you very much again for spending the time with us and having a lot of great input and advice for the entire community. So I think I can hand it back to David for some last words, but thanks to you.
I make one last comment.
Mm-hmm.
I make one last comment. I invite anybody who has a startup company that they're thinking about to send me an email. I'm a startup junkie.
Thanks, Kurt. Thanks, Carl. Thank all the attendees who are still with us. Just remember, our next webinar will be on November 10th, and you can find all the details on the NNCI website, nnci.net, under the events page. Thanks very much, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
You.